the census, they use a different.
It wasn't the actual census.
Right, yeah, they do an update, they do an official update,
Oh, that's
like,
probably what it is.
every year, but it's based on a different methodology, it's not actually statistical. I don't know what they use, you know, some kind of, I don't know what they use, but it's not the same methodology as actually surveying, it's, you know, more hocus pocus. Yeah, I think last year, 2024, it showed Great Falls, Cascade County actually shrinking, like 0.1%.
Nice, that was what I was supposed to.
Yeah.
I'm doing my part, so.
There you go. Good work.
Take one for the team and do it again.
That job is mid-do.
2 in diapers at a time isn't bad enough, I should shoot for 3.
Yes.
No, you go with fertility drugs and get a set of quads and just nail it all at once.
I told my wife that I wouldn't have minded twins the first time around, because like going from 0 kids to any amount is a shock to the system. So it's like, you know, just 0 to 1, 0 to 2, and then we had the 1, I was like, no, I was very wrong. 2 and then 7.
Woohoo! You made it. Clock has just struck 1, non-officially late. So, with the clock reading 1, I would like to call this meeting to order. I would like to reiterate the board appreciates participation from the public. If you have comments throughout the meeting or work session, please stand up, state your name and address, and your comments will be heard. Shall we stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So, we should take roll. And now I'm one-handed here. That's not working apparently.
You just look like you've got the barbecue mitt on or something.
I'm struggling. Okay. Commissioner Swathward.
Present.
Commissioner Thompson.
Present.
Commissioner Gibbs.
Present.
Commissioner Whiting.
Here.
Excellent. Commissioner Hovind is here. So the quorum, I guess I officially call the meeting to order. And we'll move on to the consent agenda, which is composed of all the things I cannot read of right now. Okay, consent is made up of routine daily today items which require board action but do not appear to have significant public impact. Items may be pulled from the consent agenda for separate discussion by vote by any board member. Items today are approval of board meeting minutes from April 2025, payroll checks totaling $107,366.52 for April 2025, maintenance and operation checks numbered 28,944 to 28,998, totaling $138,072.61 for April of 2025. Approval of passenger facility charge totaling $63,784.25 for April of 2025, and financial reports for April of 25. Are there any items the board members would like to pull from the consent agenda? Any discussion? I would entertain a motion.
Move to accept the consent agenda as written.
All right.
A second.
Excellent. Any further discussion? those in favor of the motion? Say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. The motion carries. Excellent. Let us move to the director's report.
Yes, thank you. Just jumping briefly into the financials, we approach 2 months left in the year. Actually, as we sit here right now, a month and a few weeks left in the year. But we do expect revenue to come in a little better than target, 1 to 2% better, mainly driven by passenger-related activities, parking, rental car, food concessions. And so that's positive. I think we'll be very close to record revenue on many of those categories, so that's good. On the expense side, you can see overall we're still underspent pretty significantly, although we expect to end up on budget by the year end. Brian has quite a bit of work to complete the next month on repairs. We've got a couple trucks we've got to get fixed that need to be built in this current year, so we're going to get some of that work done. We're going to try to buy ahead as much as possible on fuel and broom fill for next year with the Minneapolis flight stopping in September. We want to make sure we have a little pressure on the budget as possible, so we're going to try to get some of that those consumables purchased before the end of the fiscal year. You can see we're well underspent on marketing. We've done that by design in order to afford the extra fuel expense and those types of things at the year end. Major repairs, we've got water heater on the new part of the building in the back, 2014 part of the building. Water heater's 10 years old, it's obviously going to fail. So we're going to replace that, a few other things, and so we cut the marketing expenses to help fund a few of those last minute repairs. But we do expect to be about on budget for the expenses by the end of June. So both revenue and expense should be right around target. On the traffic side, since we met last, Delta has announced they're going to remove their flight September 8th to Minneapolis. To kind of look, I put together a couple quick slides to kind of demonstrate the situation that we're seeing. So this is what we've been talking about for a better part of a decade. The planes are simply getting bigger. And these numbers are hard to see, I know. But basically, this is the capacity of all the airlines in May, June, July, August, September, and October. May being sort of what I would call the spring schedule before we get into the summer schedule. And what this shows is in May of 24 versus May of 18, we've got about 24% more capacity than we had in the 2019 May. When you look specifically at Delta, we actually have 39% more capacity, and that's because we've got those 76-seaters running 3 a day instead of the 50-seaters. So when you think about it, each one of those transitions to 76 seats is 10,000 seats per year. So with 3 flights a day, that works out to 30,000 additional seats per year. With the population stagnant, that means we've got quite a bit more seating than we had prior, and we haven't been able to really keep that full. As you get into summer, we've always had the ability to absorb additional summer traffic, particularly in the last 10 years, since we kind of started the Genuine Montana campaign. We've gone from 2.7, 2.5 passengers per populace up to about 3.2. And so in the summer, we can absorb more capacity, and that's visitors coming in. That's a little bit more Canadian traffic going out in those summer months. And so when you look at the summer capacity here, we've only got about 7-8% more capacity in the summertime with the 3 a day schedule on 76-seaters. If you remember back years ago, before COVID, occasionally Delta would add a 4th Salt Lake, or United would fly an additional flight. So we always had some additional capacity. Minneapolis at one point was on an Airbus. So we always had additional summer capacity in the last 10 years. So in the summertime, we could actually fill the additional seating of having the 76-seat Delta 3 a day to Salt Lake and the 76-seat Minneapolis. But as you get back into spring, if you looked at all the months in the spring, they'd be very similar. We're about 35-38% more capacity with those 76-seaters and Minneapolis. Looking into the fall, these are the first months, really October, the first scheduled month forward without the Minneapolis flight in the seating. And what you can see there is, or what maybe you can't see, but I can tell you, is we've got 10% more seats in October of 25 than we did in 18. So even with the Minneapolis flight gone, because of the additional capacity to Denver and the additional capacity to Salt Lake of a 76-seat jet, we still have substantially more traffic, more seating than we had prior to that, to COVID. So that's really the illustrative point. You've probably often heard me say, this chart kind of shows the whole story. 25 years of population history right here, about 50,000 back in 1990, about 60,000 in 24. If you go back to 1970, we were about 60,000. So really we're about 200, within 200 people in 1970. But just in the modern age of aviation, you can see we've been 50 to 60,000 people. The airport traffic has been pretty stable. As I said before, as we launched into Montana, we saw more summer inbound traffic, really Frontier kind of catapulted that forward. We were able to get up to kind of 3.2 passengers per capita. And so we've kind of held that ratio. Obviously in COVID, everything went south. But then as we returned last year back up to 3.2, we're kind of on that same line. So the airport will generate about 3.2 passengers per capita. And that's kind of where we'll be. And so when you break that down on a daily basis, kind of ignoring the summer bulge of additional traffic, that works out to about 500 passengers a day. So we've got about capacity for about 500 passengers. Obviously when we're flying 76-seat jets, if you're flying 50-seat jets, that's 10, that's 14 maybe flights. When you figure 80% capacity, 75% capacity on each flight, you can have about 14, maybe 16 flights a day with 500 passengers on a 50-seat jet. As you get to 76-seat jets, that's less flights, right? As the market moves toward larger and larger planes, 150-seat planes are kind of where everything's headed. That's 3, 4, 5 flights a day. So a half or even a third of where we were with 50-seat jets. That's where the market seems to be moving. And so, this kind of illustrates the point of, why we are where we are. As the planes have gotten bigger, that gives us too much capacity in the shoulder months. And summer capacity is about right, but too much capacity in the shoulder months. And so that's the reason we're seeing some difficulty keeping that Minneapolis flight. Minneapolis in particular, if you know your lineage of airlines, I'm sure some of you do, aviation nuts out in the room. Years and years ago in the Midwest, in the upper Midwest, there were quite a few regional airlines. You had Masaba, Pinnacle, Compass, Comair. You had a lot of people. They've either failed or they've consolidated. And now you're really down to 2 operators that kind of work in that upper Midwest area with a Delta flag. We were the furthest west that Endeavor ever flew when they were flying. And so they really want to be Minneapolis and east. And then we're kind of on the outer edge of where SkyWest would normally fly in Minneapolis. So SkyWest is based out of Salt Lake and kind of that warm west area. It's kind of where they want to be. So Great Falls to Minneapolis is kind of the edge going eastbound. So we're kind of right on the cleavage of the eastbound carriers and the westbound carriers in terms of regional airlines. If you know anything about the regional carriers, they don't have nearly enough 76-seat jets to replace the 50s, and they're unlikely to buy enough. So again, as we go forward the next 20 years, what we're going to see is more consolidation because there just simply aren't planes. Most airlines, most of the big airlines, when you get to a 90-seat jet, that's one of their own pilots flying it. So they're not going to have a regional partner for that. That's going to be Delta, American, whoever. They're going to have to fly it. They're loath to fly the 90-seat jet. It just isn't as profitable as larger planes. So again, the market continues to consolidate towards that 140, 130, 150 seat plane. Looking specifically at our market, this is the average ticket prices in the teal at the top. And so when you look at last year, we averaged about $480 per ticket for a round trip ticket. If you go back to 2006, we were actually $496. So the ticket price is lower than it was nearly 20 years ago, the average ticket price. And you can see it's fluctuated up and down in there, but generally speaking, it's flat. The other lines you can see here, this is 100 gallons of gas, which equates to about the $400 mark for gas. You can see the price difference since 1993. It's really closed the gap, right? The blue one, milk, or I'm sorry, no, the black one is milk. So this one, 100 gallons of milk cost you back in the late 90s. And like I said, it closed the gap with those airfares, right? So it's growing much faster. And then housing prices in blue, again, has really closed the gap with the with the ticket prices. So essentially, if you think of it this way, the traffic in Great Falls has not increased since the 90s. The average ticket price has not really increased since the 90s. So we're looking at flat level revenue for nearly 30 years. That's the concerning part. There's really not any growth at all. And so when we get to that point, that's when we've got to be concerned about the future of air service in this part of the country and markets like us. And so you've seen me throw this slide up before. We were talking about the census tracts prior to the meeting. These are the last 3 census tracts. Back in 2000, we were kind of in the middle of the state. In the 20 years since, we grew 1%. Next closest county grew 26 times that. Same thing with median income. You go back to 2000, we were kind of right in the middle. Advance that 18 years, and we're lowest and slowest growing. So those economic factors are what's concerning, because when you look at these types of stats, the regional airplane size has been increasing now for 20 years. It really started, and many of you will remember the Metroliner, back in the day, even Caravans had some commercial service, Saabs. I mean, there were a lot of what we used to call bug smashers, real small planes that would fly you all around. As that plane left the fleet nearly 20 years ago now, we moved to the 36-seat plane and the Dash series airplanes, the ATRs, the small ATRs, small Dashes. And there was a lot of stability there for about 10 years, 15 years, where everyone had air service on 36-seat planes, things were going well. And then we started moving to the larger 50-seat jets. In that transition period, dozens and dozens of airports lost all air service. Topeka, Kansas, capital Kansas. Olympia, Washington, capital of Washington. Capital, South Dakota. A lot of cities that would have business reasons to have aviation lost all air service. And then what we're seeing, even within the markets that are keeping their air service, is massive numbers of route cancellations every summer. And so you see here, United 38 routes dropped, American 22 routes dropped. We're seeing a lot of consolidation. And so, here's a good example. Dubuque lost all their air service in July of 2022. It's now a 3-hour drive to the nearest air service. So these are the types of things we're seeing happen in the market. I've talked about it many times. You've seen this slide a million times. Some of this information is actually starting to get dated. But I think, this is one of the quotes that I think is really telling, is the highways become the first leg of a journey for a lot of travelers in a lot of small markets. I think Points guy talked about a summary of Kirby CEO's, ex-CEO of United, some of the things he said, the staffing related impacts, 50-seat jet, they're just not going to be able to keep all the markets. And so we're in the midst of seeing those consolidations now. And so, I think our path forward, you've heard me talk about this a number of times. We've been successful with air service incentives. That is our path forward. We've got to consolidate demand in the region. For one time a year, we can consolidate that demand this summer. So we've really got to concentrate on bringing some ultra low-cost carrier service in summer, and that's the next step forward. We're still trying to raise about $300,000 to make that happen. We'll be meeting with the airlines in 2 weeks how to jumpstart. We've got a couple of the ultra low-cost carriers teed up to talk to. But really the path forward is continue to grow that summer time when we can get discretionary travel consolidated in our area, more Canadians coming down, more people heading out. That's how we can grow the market. And then as that price comes down on those ultra low-cost carriers, that's going to get the discretionary traveler going again. It'll grow the overall traffic number, and so the market will look bigger. We really want to get to that 250 level. As you get to 250, you've kind of amortized 3 flights a day on regional jet aircraft, and now it's either upgrading to mainline or it's adding additional hubs. And so 250 is a key point to get to. We can kind of get 3 a day to all the hubs we have service to. If we can get to that point, and then that will really grow us into the next generation of airplane and make more markets possible. And that's really what you've seen throughout the state as the other communities have grown population-wise significantly more than we have. As they get to that 250, sort of 280 level, that's when they've added markets, they've added additional larger airplanes, and that boosts them up to the next level of growth. And so You've heard me say it before, but mainline airplanes automatically come with a cheaper ticket because you're gonna have middle seats. And most of the time, when you're looking at a last minute flight and you find a cheap fare, it's because you're sitting in the middle, behind the wing. And so the plane alone makes a difference in terms of the average airfare. And so as we grow, that'll be something we'll see in the market as a natural transition towards cheaper ticket prices based on larger planes. Any questions on that?
Well, thank you. No?
Sure. Let's see, so on the land development side, we're continuing to work with a couple of tenants on some potential build-outs. We're also working with the city to get our pre-application meeting scheduled. Looks like there's enough money in the TIF district to fund about half the utility expansion, which is good news. We'll have about $350,000 worth of TIF. It looks like to apply towards the $650 in utilities, leaving us with about $300,000 buy-in. And that would get us utilities down to the snow barn, so about 25 additional acres of developable land, some of which we'll hope to develop right away, with some things we'll talk about later. And then 2 more condo buildings will fit amongst that 25 acres. And we'll still have a few other parcels too as projects come. But good news there. Hopefully, as conversations advance with a couple of potential tenants, I'm hopeful that maybe even next month we might come back to the board to talk about condo development. If not, it'll probably be this fall. I'm targeting maybe a 6-unit development this time, twice as big as we did the first round. We have a couple potential tenants that I think might fit in that next phase that we're talking to that I think would be a great opportunity to continue that development forward. And so more to come in the next couple of months on that. On the capital side, if you look out back there, we've got just pallet after pallet after pallet of roofing material. The roofing contractor will be coming over from Spokane here in the next week and starting on the main portion of the roof. This phase will capture the entire skylight area, the high part of the roof, and then the front section in the middle and the back section in the middle. We'll be picking up the concourse with the west concourse expansion and completing that. And that'll leave us with, in terms of the old roof, the only thing left to do is the east concourse over here. It's not in great shape, but I think we can probably give it another year or two before we have to attack that. And then we'll have mainly, really all the roof replaced. The section over the 3rd floor was done in 2008, I believe. Is that right, Laura, when they added the 3rd floor?
3,
2003.
between 1 and 3.
So it's approaching 20 years too, but it's in better condition certainly than the other roofs. Something we'll have to get on the capital plan in the future too. Concourse A, Taxiway A, the paint crew's supposed to be out here next week or the week after to put the final coating of paint. As we talked about last fall, typically you let the oil burn out of the fog seal for months and months until you go back and paint the final coating so it doesn't just come right back off. So they'll be out to finish the paint coating from last fall when we fog sealed. And then we've got some bid packages that we're preparing for the West Concourse over the next couple of weeks. They'll be going out and getting some bids to kind of wrap up the project bidding for this year on the West Concourse. So far, the budget looks pretty good with the bids we've got in hand. We've got the foundation, which will be precast, and then the windows done, and the windows foundation, I'm missing a component, steel. And so we've got the steel prices in too, so a lot of the big structural elements, and most of the construction will happen next year. We've got some elements this year, so that'll be underway here shortly. And then the SRE, do we have a scheduled start date?
Contractors signing contract and they'll give us a schedule.
They'll give us a schedule in
Next
so
few weeks,
next couple of weeks, okay. So probably after July 4th would be my guess at this point. But and then lastly, the PFC application. We've resubmitted the PFC application. As we said last month, we've taken the money we were going to use for the exit lane barriers and moved that into local match on the West Concourse, and then we'll use the local match money that we would have spent out of pocket to come back and buy those exit lane barriers. And so we're waiting to see if the FAA wants us to go back to a consultation with the airlines or what they want for next steps. But we should be wrapping that up pretty quickly too. But I think that's all I've got. Did I miss anything?
All right. Any questions for the director? move on to item 1, operation budget.
Yes. Find the page. Terribly slow, sorry. So we have here the operating budget for the upcoming year. As we mentioned earlier, we've cut the forecast a little bit for next year. We had planned on quite a bit of revenue growth, about 10%. We've tamped that down a little bit, recognizing we won't have that Minneapolis flight after September. So a little less revenue growth than we initially had planned. So only thinking we'll get about 100,000, 150,000. A lot of that stuff is stuff that's already in the pipe for next year. For instance, the FIS fees weren't budgeted last year. A few other things. The new rental car revenue will be a full year of rental car revenue, which is substantially higher in the new contract. So some things that were already underway that will drive revenue growth next year. On the operating expense side, you can see if you look at the forecast for year end compared to the budget, we're about the same as we plan to finish the year this year. We've cut from the budget pretty substantially, a couple $100,000 off last year's budget. Just kind of gone through category by category and tried to rationalize everything we could to try and get that cost down. And so we're about where we plan to finish the year, both revenue and expense wise. We're thinking next year will be a very similar year. We expect traffic to be slightly lower, probably about 8%, maybe 7% lower, missing those Minneapolis flights. But as I showed you before, we do have enough seats because Salt Lake had quite a bit of capacity this last year. So it's possible we may not see as dramatic of a passenger decline as we're budgeting. But you know, we've went ahead and budgeted about a 7% down. Walking through the budget in a little more detail on the next page, you can kind of see the categories we plan to have growth in. Badging fees, the FAA has changed, TSA has changed the rules in the last couple of years. It used to be we could go a couple of years without reissuing badges. Now you either have to reissue them annually or you have to do a pretty substantial audit. So most airports have just decided to issue them annually because the audit seems to be more work than the reissuing the badges. So we've got revenue going up because we're doing that particular item more often. That's the main driver of growth in there. The rental cars, I already mentioned that. We have a new contract that started in January, so we'll have a full year of it next year, so you'll see growth throughout those rental car categories. When our revenue goes down on the passenger side, it naturally forces the airline rates up because we operate on what I call a kind of a cash drawer basis. We basically credit the airlines for all the revenue we make, and then they pay fees based on what's left. So we take the cost of the airport, deduct all the revenues we can make, and then the airlines make up the residual. Because we have less revenue anticipated from parking and those types of things next year, it does naturally force up the airline rates somewhat. So you can see a few of the airline categories like airline rent goes up, airline joint use goes up, the loading bridge fees go up substantially. That's a cost recovery calculation based on our cost of acquiring bridges. We amortize the bridges out to the airlines over 20 years. Since we're buying a new bridge for Gate 2, Delta wanted us to buy a new bridge for their gate, those costs go up substantially because of the cost recovery calculation. So basically the free airlines repay us monthly for the cost of loading bridges plus 5%. And so that cost will go up just based on an additional bridge being added in. So that's why you see the growth there. Overall, as I said, we're only expecting income growth of about 4.5% over last year's budget. We'll exceed budget by over 100,000, I think, so it's only about half that from actual by the time we get done with the fiscal year up to the budgeted amount. On the expense side, as I mentioned earlier, we've tried to cut through these categories, so you see substantial reductions throughout where we've gone in and said, okay, we haven't been spending paint and chemicals, or we have enough paint and chemicals to accomplish what we're going to do this summer, so let's take that out of the budget purchase for next year's purchases and get through next year. So you can see a lot of those categories, we kind of mellowed it down as much as we could, trying to get those costs down. We're planning substantially less marketing expense. That's about $40,000 down there in the professional services. Next year, we're just not going to do as much marketing because we're not going to have as many seats. On the utility side, we have plans for reductions in there. We had 2 massive water leaks last year. We ruptured a pipe over near the car wash, and then we had something break on the chiller last year, and so we had water flowing out for days and days and days. So we ended up with two massive water bills. So we're not planning to do that this year, so you can see we're planning a 22% reduction. Hopefully we can achieve that just because of the couple of massive leaks we have. That's where we plan to get that savings. Let's see, and so overall, when you look at the total operating budget for next year, again, not much growth in expenses, about 4.5% about 6% down over last year's actual budget. We plan to spend under that budget slightly, so you can see we'll have some quite a bit lower budget for the upcoming year. Looking at the airline rates, in our operating budget every year with our ordinance, we adopt airline rates. So these tables that you see in the back of the budget are airline calculations for how we calculate our user rates. Basically, we do a revenue forecast, we do an expense forecast, we add in debt service, we add in some crossovers from the cost centers that we don't make money on. For instance, we have what we call our non-aero, which is basically a cost center for things that are not related to the airlines directly, that are aeronautical uses, like the AdMax areas, pavements we have in the GA area, those types of things fall into non-aero, fall into aero, and then non-aero includes all the roadways and those types of things. Obviously, the roadways themselves have no revenue source, so that's always going to be a loss for the most part. And you can kind of see that as you go through and look at the cost centers individually. We've got our revenue forecast in here, which is in the budget. We've got a little bit of debt service left on the railroad cars, but that's paid for with CFCs, so it's not directly our debt service. And then as you get back to the back of the calculations, you can see we calculate our terminal rate, we calculate our landing fee for the next year, and those are the primary tables that the airlines are concerned with. Our loading bridge fee is also in here, calculated next year to go up dramatically because of the acquisition of the new rates. At the very back of the budget, these numbers, it's called our airline cost per enplanement. So when you add up everything we charge the airlines, and then you divide that by your number of enplanements, that gives you your cost per enplanement. So next year we plan to charge the airlines $6.75 for every passenger boarded, which is low by industry standards, a fairly good rate. By way of comparison, 20 years ago when I was in Seattle, we were charging close to $25 per enplanement. There are other airports out there with 35 at that time. So there was quite a few larger airports that charge quite a bit more. 675, I think, is our target's around 6. We're going to be a little bit high next year because we're planning a reduction in enplanements. But I think 675 is a very good planning rate. And that's all I've got on the budget.
Is 675 still the lowest in the state?
I haven't looked at the cost per enplanement. That's not a number you see published. The user rates, so the landing fee, those are published every year by the airports. So the last few years we've had the lowest landing fee in the state. On the terminal rent, which is our other main charge, we've been usually first or second. Helen and us kind of go back and forth on who's cheapest. So in terms of the actual rates, it gets hard to compare airports when they get much bigger, because like a Bozeman, for example, has 1.6 million enplanements. So now, there's kind of a sweet spot in there where you haven't really taken on your own power generation and stuff like that in the size of the airport, where you have a lot of revenue from parking and those things and not much additional expense to get from 500,000 to 1 million boardings. And so, they can get a very low cost per enplanement. So if I had to guess, I would say Bozeman's probably the cheapest in the state because of all the enplanements, but I don't know that for sure. But yeah, I think 20 years ago was a good planning number. If you get to 6, the airline is very happy. And they've never complained about our rates. So I would say nationally we're in the lower 25 percentile of airport cost per enplanement. Within the state, it's hard to say because we have a couple cheap ones in there. But I would suspect the airports that have recently done debt, like for instance, Kalispell has that big terminal program, I would suspect they're well above this. Maybe even Missoula, I don't really know how they finance theirs. But I would suspect as you take on that additional debt, it's hard to keep the rate down. But yeah, I would think we're in probably the lower half of Montana, yeah.
One question. Just curious, John, on employee health and life insurance, I see that's cut 15%. Do you not allow these guys to eat cookies, or are you just healthier?
We switched plans, last year, and we got some decent savings out of that. So, yeah, I think Laura did a good job, and Shailene on finding us a plan that was a little more economic.
Great.
In addition to that, I would say too, we've had a lot of turnover, and so we have gaps. We've had some gaps in employment. That's been pretty consistent for the last couple of years, so that's kind of helped too. I think we've probably, if you took how many employees we actually averaged the last 4 years, it's probably 12 instead of 14 or 15. Seems like, like everybody, we just have had more turnover.
Any additional questions regarding the operation and maintenance budget? All right, I would entertain a motion.
So moved. I move we approve the 2026 O&M budget
As presented.
as presented.
Wonderful.
I second it.
Lovely. Commissioner Gibbs, do you have any questions?
Nope, I'm good.
Excellent. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. The motion carries.
Thank you.
All righty. Jumping forward to the 3-year audit. Yes, services contract.
You may remember, the year before last, we did an RFP for auditing services. We were at the end of our contract, and our auditor indicated they weren't going to do government sector audits any longer. We received one bid from an out-of-town auditor. They were somewhat uncertain about how that would work, being out of town, and this office, it was, I think, one of their first airports, and so they presented a 3-year contract that we felt was a little high. So we kind of came back to the board and said, why don't we do 1 year and kind of see where things work out, and maybe after that they can propose a multi-year. And so that's kind of where we are. We've completed 1 year of audit. I don't think we were as bad as they expected. So they've offered a little bit better pricing. So we have a 3-year audit offer right here. You can see the pricing that they've laid out for us. And if we adopt this, we can sign that 3-year contract with them and have this pricing. The other option would be to continue to go year by year. Don't see the prospect of government accounting getting more proposals. They continue to change the rules. The more we deviate from private sector accounting, the harder it is to keep those certifications, and continuing education becomes a real drain. And so many of these folks don't retain multiple certifications, so they might only be a private sector accountant or a government sector. So I would suggest this is probably about as good a pricing as we're going to see for a while until there's some sea change in interest in accounting. I don't know when that'll happen. But if we had more accountants in the industry, more people could specialize, I think, and you'd see more interest in government accounting. But it does seem to be one of the sectors that's hardest to find on there right now.
John, I know it's been brought up before. I don't see the rates for the auditor in this item. I see the rates for
The initial.
I see the initial, and I see what we paid them for that first year. Am I looking
It's
right
on
at
the
it?
sheet. It's on this
Well, I see the,
paragraph of what going,
That was
how it
their-
will raise each year
well, that was their bid for.
initially.
That was the first bid they put forward for 3 years, which the staff thought was a little high, so they did the 61,390,
61,390.
That's what we did for,
the 1 year.
that was our 1 year, no, the packet from the work session last time had the actual contract in it.
Is that like in the packet?
So it wasn't.
Is it unchanged from when it was?
It is unchanged from the work session, it's the same one from the work session last time,
Okay.
for the 3 years.
I'll pull that up real quick. It was more just for my own curiosity. Appreciate it.
I mean, we could,
Well, this is gonna be difficult for me to agree to your request to authorize the signing of a 3-year contract when we don't have a contract.
yeah,
It was in the work session, I can go print it.
Well, I'm not disagreeing with that, I'm just saying it's not here today.
Right.
I mean, we can table it and bring it back to June.
We can have it in here, we can go and get it.
Yeah, I can go grab it real fast.
That would be lovely. Thank you. Let's table this and go to item 3, please.
Just pause this, we're not tabling it, we're pausing it.
Can we slam
Okay, is there a difference?
Yes, because table means we're not gonna deal with it, it's dead.
Oh, well then I'm not doing that.
Good idea.
So then what does put a pin in it mean instead of?
Huh. I should really read that
Please hold.
big book.
Instead of moving on to item 3, can we all just agree to slam our hand in a car door when we go out to the parking lot after the meeting? I feel like that would be just as much fun.
I've already
It's a little close to home, apologies.
Yeah. So, item 3.
Item 3. So as we have been mentioning now for almost a year, the customs folks have changed the way they're interpreting the language in the customs agreements. It was for many, many years that airports provided bricks and mortar, and if you provided the bricks and mortar and you had a successful application to be an international airport, they would fund the soft costs, personnel, equipment, furniture, in order to staff that function. Seems as though about 3 or 4 years ago, that deal changed, and the customs folks are interpreting the facility requirements to mean that we have to provide furniture, fixtures, and equipment. And so the customs folks have prepared a request to us, and that request is about $76,000 in equipment for the 3 to 4 folks in the office, and then $10,000 in annual service fees to maintain that equipment. So the IT support, those types of things in order to maintain their equipment. They're anticipating that we would receive an equipment request like this every 3 years as their equipment wears out and they need to replenish it. In researching the issue, as we reached across the country and talked to other airports, I believe we talked to well over a dozen other airports. Many of them have received the same request that they ante up for things like computers, copiers, even cable TV in some cases, which seems kind of crazy. But and so this was a typical request we were seeing from other airports, 2 other airports. And so what we proposed and the board approved in the last meeting was the addition of a new FIS fee or facility fee for the use of our FIS facilities. We have the cost of the building itself every year, about $55,000, and then we have the equipment costs, which we're being asked to make, plus the annual service fee. So we figure about $75,000 a year in total costs that we need to recover from the cost center. We've put in place the new facility fee and started collecting that. You can see it's $50 for a small plane, up to $500 for a larger plane, and we're hoping to recover the majority of these costs so we can retain this function. But we do need to make the decision to pay for the customs demands, computers and other equipment that they want in their office. And so I would ask the board's permission to go out and contract with them. I mean, that's the other complaint I heard as I called around the country and talked to other airports. The other complaint you really hear is you have to buy it from a government contractor because of their security requirements and the equipment specifications. As we can all imagine, that a federal agency writes, it's a very specific thing we're buying. And so I know one airport in the Dakotas said they could get the same exact equipment for half the cost, but it's not allowed. And so we're proposing to go ahead and purchase this equipment as they've requested, and then continue that relationship with having international at our airport. As I've said in the past, we get 600, 900 flights a year. Vast majority of those are small flights, single engine type of airplanes that are transiting between here and Canada. We receive a fair number of larger airplanes going through, and from this point forward, we'll continue to collect that fee. We'll revisit it with the board from time to time to try and ensure that we're not losing $50,000 a year on this cost center. We do, I think, on behalf of Holden Aviation and Great Falls Jet Center, want to keep this business if we can. And if we can make this cost center whole, I think it's a good investment to continue to have the FIS capability here.
Quick thing before we move on to what I'm sure will be substantive discussion on this. Just want to make a statement for the record for those who are here today and for those who may watch this later. What you say, girl can dream. For anyone who's seen The Simpsons, one of my favorite jokes in there is the old man yells at cloud newspaper headline. Feels a little bit like what I'm about to do here, but I'd just like to draw everyone's attention to page 35 in the board meeting packet. It's an email that Director Faulkner has included from a Mr. Joshua Manuel, whose position title is given as branch chief from the Logistics and Facilities Branch of U.S. Customs and Border Protection. I very much appreciate John and Laura's professionalism and openness throughout this process. That professionalism, I think, is particularly displayed as they repeatedly refer to this as an agreement or a negotiation with CBP. While they're far too professional to say what I'm about to say, I'd just like to point out this last paragraph here. This is a direct quote from Mr. Manuel. Quote, "We understand that the Great Falls International Airport believes the maintenance cost of the inspectional information technology systems to be exceptionally high. If the Great Falls International Airport feels that the amount of business clearing through the airport does not justify the maintenance of inspection equipment and personnel, it may request a withdrawal of its international airport designation as per the above CFRs. That is completely a Great Falls International Airport business decision, and we would respect your decision either way you should so choose," close quote. This is not a statement of a party in a negotiation. This is not a statement of a party in an agreement. Obviously, in today's politics, words like extortion and gangster get thrown around like so many nickels. I think there is room for these words to be used here. This is not a relationship between peers. This is meet our demands or we're taking our ball and going home. For all the reasons that we've continually discussed for the last few meetings, I believe it's worth it for the airport to knuckle under. I refuse to use the words enter into an agreement, though that may be the legal term for what we're about to do. Basically, I'm saying we should meet the demands in this, well, it's an email and not words cut out of a newspaper and glued to a sheet of notebook paper. But I think it's worth it to the airport, but this sort of behavior incenses me. This is an unelected, unappointed representative of the United States government who's simply saying, meet our demands, or we're driving a stake through the heart of your operations. And by the way, we're probably gonna put your FBOs out of business. And if you don't like it, just know that you are allowed to request a withdrawal of your airport designation as per the above codes of federal regulation. John and Laura do a great job of communicating with the public through the Facebook page and other means about why the airport does a lot of the things it does. And it's for that reason that I'm making this statement now, that when this, not if this, but when this outrages people as much as it does, I'm sure, every commissioner here, we can point back to people like Mr. Manuel and his coworkers who are simply saying, meet our demands or go out there and change that sign to read Regional Airport. I do think it's worth it for us to do that, but if this decision in this email annoys you, then please know that you're in good company. And with that, I'll bite my tongue and agree to pay the kidnapper's demands.
Thank you.
That was well said. So dittos. Is there any other discussion associated with this level of agreement we are potentially entering into? Public.
John, you reached out to our congressman. Did you ever get a reply back?
I got a reply just that they were having discussions, and that was the extent of it. They had reached out into the ether to talk to some folks from CBP, but I don't know if those discussions have happened, or if they got any reply. And what we found in the last year or so. I mean, we've reached out a number of times, employee screening is a good example, and oftentimes the agencies don't feel compelled to comply, or reply, I should say. I mean, there's been times there's just simply been no reply. So I think, I have to relay one other interesting discussion we had with CBP, which was, when they talked about their demands to Atlanta, the glee that was expressed to us when they simply told Atlanta that they wouldn't process any more new international flights until Atlanta agreed to pay the $2 million they were asking for from that airport. I think that's kind of the status that these agencies feel they have in our current times, is they can do what they want, and really don't answer to anyone. I wish that worked so, but like I said, whether we're talking about employee screening, which we went through a big political exercise last year. I think we involved 12 or so states, 20 or so delegations, and we couldn't even get replies from the agencies on that. To this, it just seems as though we've got someone driving the train that isn't interested when you pull the cord and say it's time to get off.
At the risk of throwing more fuel on a fire of the situation, what assurances did you receive about the timing? I thought I heard you say every 3 years they would replace computers, but if they talked about other technology in the facility?
No, my understanding based on those discussions is catch as catch can. So I mean, and I even, one of the questions I asked in our discussions, which I think you might have been CC'd on, Dwight, is, so if someone trips and spills coffee on the copier tomorrow, does that mean we're getting a bill? And more or less the answer was yes. I think it's an open checkbook. And that, you may recall at the very beginning of these discussions, that was really where my reservations were. And I have no real assurance that we'll be able to keep up with this thing as it rolls down the tracks. I mean, there may come a time where we all just say it's not enough. And that's why, we kind of outlined this the way it is, where we've added all the costs in and said, okay, we'll charge what we think it costs to recover it. And then as that cost gets higher and higher, I suspect the business will go lower and lower. I mean, I think you were CC'd on one person already who complained about the current fee, and they were at the $50 level and said, we're not flying out of here anymore. So I replied back and said, we're aware. I mean, I even sent them a copy of the bill in the email and said, this is what we're up against, right? I mean, we're not doing this because we want to make more money. We're doing this to retain the service and have it pay for itself. And it's a difficult prospect looking ahead, not knowing what those costs will be and how much the market can bear as to whether or not we'll be able to keep it.
Well, again, not wanting to add more negatives into this, but as I monitor that facility down there, I see a very antiquated and outdated video surveillance system. You can just feel that email coming because that was a zero line item on this particular request. And then the phone system is 10, 15 years old. And I can just feel that one coming as well. So, computer is maybe 3 years out. The other thing, and this is working with the government, so this isn't a logical statement. But it would seem like if they're asking the airport authority as the sponsor of the facility to provide them with new computers, it seems like we would have a right to say, okay, then you give us the old ones. As opposed to them taking the older ones and putting them in some other location just to expand their continue using them at some other location.
Yeah, I think
Something I
that's,
can speak to that, they would just throw them out.
they'll destroy
They're not
them,
gonna
sure.
use them, they'll destroy them or
Well, that
throw
was
Do
them.
we have proof of that though?
Early on is the ownership. I mean, who owns this computer at the end of the day?
And that was another interesting discussion with FAA, because early on, I did email FAA and said, is this something we can even do? I mean, to me, this looks like a local authority subsidizing the federal government. And they agreed that we can do this. you know, but they did say that the equipment should stay here. You know, so I mean, I think as we reply back, now that I have permission to say we're gonna do this, that is one thing we're going to want to settle with them is this stuff does not leave the premises. You know, and I get it if you have to pull the hard drive and destroy it, but I mean, we have computers that are older than this by quite a ways, and if we're replacing them every 3 years, you know, the airport authority has never paid this much to renovate our entire IT. And so, you know, there maybe is some secondary use that we could get out of these, and I think it's reasonable for us to ask for that.
I have plenty to say, as I said last time. This sets my hair on fire, in case you can't see it. I'm gonna be a solid no. I don't. It is extortion. And I'm gonna give you 2 examples of other federal agencies in this community. So the Social Security office that came here, did they go to our city and our county and say, you're gonna build the building, you're gonna buy the land, you're gonna buy all of our computers so we can provide Social Security services to the citizens of your community? They did not. The IRS office, downtown Great Falls, did they do the same thing? They did not. I'm not done with this fight. That's where I'm coming from. I'll go talk to our legislative congressional people. I'm very good friends with Randy Bogdan, who works for Dane, and I'll have the conversation. Because I am not okay with this. And that attitude, that is not appropriate. I don't believe he has the authority to tell us to kick sand. And I think we should raise it higher than that. It's absurd to me, and in these documents, we don't buy any of it. We just have to put the wire so they can plug it in. They get to keep it, they get to own it. The stuff that I deal with at the elections office with Homeland Security, I relayed that to you guys last time, there's gonna be this ongoing, continual thing, nickel and dime us on whatever, and we have zero authority but to put it all out there. There is no other federal agency doing this to anybody. I call BS, and I'm willing to personally communicate with whoever we need to as a representative. If you're all okay with this, Terry Thompson will take it on. Because I'm not. I want to hear it out of the mouth of somebody that's above this person to send us a message like that, that says you guys can bite sand, because that's not appropriate.
I'd like to be involved in
I would too.
whatever you move forward.
This reeks of
Overreach.
a shenanigan. The FAA is a federal entity, and Border Patrol's federal. 2 guys got together and said, well, technically you can't do this, but I'm gonna just give direction to all the airports that you can. And it just screams shenanigans. I cannot believe the FAA would give you directions, because it just reeks local, unadjudicated taxation of a local municipality by the federal government, an agency of the federal government. Yet, while I understand and share your passion, I am not willing to put the livelihood of our FBOs at risk yet. Not this time.
And how do we not know? If we don't ask the questions, if we don't try to get to a higher level, I'll accept it.
Well,
I'll
I'm
accept the
saying we
answer.
fight. I mean, I'm saying we fight, but I also say we write the check.
I'm genuinely concerned that we should keep our international airport, but I think this puts the screws to us because they really don't want to staff anybody here. I think they would like us to go away as an international airport.
And I
They
think
know we
that's-
don't have any growth.
Well, I think that's the key point, is that I'm in full agreement with you that we should continue to press the issue passionately. I'm also in full agreement with Commissioner Hovind on saying, blanket, let's just write the check for now. That's not the end of the story, I think it's the beginning of the story. The risk of saying, no, we will not write the check, is that Customs and Border Protection does not care if we are an international or regional airport. They don't care one iota. CBP already has to pay their people extra to live in Montana. They don't pay their people extra to live in Laredo, Texas. They would be perfectly happy to relocate all their folks to Havre and to California, New Mexico, Arizona. If we've pushed too hard without writing the check, we run the risk of losing by default because they have all the power here. That's one of the reasons why it stings so much, is because no one likes being bullied. That's
But
the
once you
simple-
write the check, there's no going back, because it's then they get to say, you have just accepted this agreement. You're okay with it, because now they know the ball really is in their court.
Well, it's like, but the $75,000-ish outlay a year is not a binding commitment going forward. If this is not working out as commissioners, it's up to us to decide if it is working out to the benefit of the airport authority. That's the first question, yes or no. Then as responsible citizens, we think about various stakeholders, our FBOs on the property, Cascade County as a whole, the city of Great Falls. Those are all very important, but yes, secondary concerns. Just because we're agreeing to do this now and to put it in the budget for this year does not mean that we don't continue to fight, and if in the end we can't make it work for us, we tell CBP, fine, you win. We're no longer an international airport, and then we see how many people start to care when we put out a press release saying, thanks to extortionate behavior of such and such personnel, enjoy becoming a regional airport.
Has our legal department read this?
The agreement, no, I don't think we've sent it to Nick, or the email. I don't think we've sent either to Nick. What I can tell you is, I know of one airport that fought it pretty aggressively, substantially larger than us. The delegation is probably similarly politically situated, and they ultimately paid. And I have to imagine that Atlanta tried pretty hard politically to keep from losing their ability to take on new flights. So I mean, when we look across the spectrum, when I called around and talked to other airports, I couldn't find anybody that had successfully stayed out of the contract and was able to avoid the costs. I mean, I agree that there's no defense for the tone in which they're using to tell everyone, hey, look, you either do this or you go away. The one thing I would say is it is a service that not every airport has. You don't have to have customs on site. You don't have to allow international clearance. I think a couple of the other facts that are kind of, I find very irritating as you look at the overall picture is, on the southern border, we treat the traffic completely differently. You're not allowed to overfly FIS facilities to get to one you like better, right? So you're deviated to the closest one in the line that is available to take your flight. Where on the northern border, you can just overfly wherever you want because it's been judged a lower risk. So, artificially, you're helping the airports along the southern border gather more business to pay for things like this, while you don't require that on the northern border. So I mean that's a frustration on top of everything else, and then on top of that, I can tell you that all of the international airports that we would default to, if you outside of the Montana airports, I can't speak for them, but for the larger airports, they don't want this single engine traffic. They don't want this small double engine traffic. They are already too busy doing what they're doing to accept more of these flights. So as less and less airports can afford to have these services, you're not doing anything beneficial for the overall aviation system. You're actually making it operate less efficiently. Because we have very little going on at 2 in the morning. If we can find a way to service these flights, it's better for the system to do that than for them to sit for 2 hours in LA, clogging up ramp space to get that same flight cleared.
Do we happen to have a date by which ransom money is due?
They wanted to know by the beginning of the month. I told them that wasn't possible. We couldn't have 2 meetings in the time frame in order to let them know. So I told them we would let them know after today's meeting whether or not we were going to pay the fee. They have to get everything kind of ordered, they said, by September, it sounded like. They have a date in September.
I think all the paperwork for us in the payment, it was end of September, beginning of October.
Yeah, so they need to get everything kind of done by September, they said, because they're losing their ability to operate on Windows, is it 10 now? Whatever it is now, they need to go to Windows 11. And their license expires in October, so they need to get everything kind of ordered and done, so that they can get everything in place so the computers still function after that. Interestingly, they initially told us only some of the computers had that problem, but this looks like a complete replacement, so, you know, we asked that question to you and didn't get a direct response.
So lack of a reasonable electronic maintenance and replacement plan has resulted in a $76,000 bill for us.
I think it's broader than that. I think it's a change in, you know, they're viewing it now as you have to provide a turnkey facility, you know, instead of you have to provide us a shell and we occupy it bricks and mortar. You know, now it is you have to provide turnkey facilities and we will provide the people in the seats.
As you may recall, board meeting or two ago, you approved to have the airport authority start collecting a facility fee. And the two FBOs have been collecting that. I think it's just getting to the point where we're gonna be forwarding those funds onto the airport authority. And from our point of view, I mean, a lot of the larger aircraft, it's just part of the cost, and they're passing it on to their passengers because they're a commercial operator. So, yeah, maybe the little Cessna single engine guy is frustrated with $50 fee, but I think our local government, all its tariffs and everything, has squelched that guy anyway. So, but the commercial operators, that revenue's coming into the airport. I'm anxious to see that over the next 4 or 6 months to see how that's working out. It's just a cost shift in some regard back to the people that are benefiting from the Board of Entry.
That's a good reminder, appreciate that.
Just, man, curious, Dwight, what of your international traffic, what percentage is commercial versus the private that would care? I mean, what percentage of people are gonna get upset, would you guess?
I feel it's a higher percentage is on the commercial side. Air ambulance, and then the wealthy people coming in from Europe. The Canadian traffic has really slowed down, and I think that's due to some of the
Bigger picture issues.
yeah, somebody else is stirring the pot, but we have implemented this. It's been a little bit painful to come to our customers and saying these fees are here, but landing fee, customs facility fee, and then if they're coming in and wanting to clear customs after their normal business hours that end at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, that is yet another fee. But we're collecting it, and not entirely without a little bit of a pain. I'm gonna add one more comment, somewhat related, but mostly unrelated. The Customs Port of Entry here informs the airport that they were not going to provide after-hours clearance unless they were compensated for their employee to come back to the airport to clear the flight. So it's a program that's been in the United States for 5, 6, 7 years, and it finally found its way to Great Falls. We became a sponsor to help aircraft that weren't signed up for the program to clear after hours at the Customs Port. And what we do is we get the bill for the man hours of the inspector to come to the airport to clear the aircraft, and we pass those costs on to our customer. And hopefully we can get some additional services out of that. We were shocked last month, which was that April's bill? Yeah. April bill from the government has the fee for the man hours, which roughly is in the neighborhood of $200 an hour for that individual to come to the airport, and it's usually 2 hours or 3 hours to clear an aircraft. Then there's another line item that says overhead burdens. Now, anybody that does payroll your overhead burdens on payroll is gonna be 20, 30% maybe. But your health insurance and all that's already covered by your primary work hours. Anything overtime is not gonna have that burden on it. The burdens that the government put on that last bill that we had to pay on behalf of that was 70%. 70%. Then there's a third line item, and it was a management,
Benefits.
huh?
It was benefits, overhead and benefits.
Yeah, the benefits was 70%. And then there was a management fee on top of that for another 10, 15% on that. It was just unbelievable, swooping in and just grabbing all this money. And we wrote we met with the local customs people and registered a complaint about that. And we just got a courtesy letter. Commissioner Thompson, we just got a courtesy letter that said that's the way it is.
There's no, just like you were saying, we were asking for backup and to see what all this money was going towards. Because we're trying to go to our customer who's angry and explain what it's paying for, and you don't get a reply.
A logical reply.
One thing I would just note is, that's an agency that's probably at the pinnacle of its power right now within the federal government, so.
But I don't believe for a second the current administration doesn't have the back of local and with the situation with immigration. This was the prior administration doing this. And I think it needs to be raised, because I don't think Elon Musk would think that that's too cool. I don't think Elon Musk or Trump, either one in their business life would be held to this type of extortion.
Well, but if you remember, like, that point was brought up when this beast first reared its ugly head months ago, or sometime last year, of some people might look at this and go, well, there are two ways that the federal government raises money. One is the Internal Revenue Service, the other is formerly the U.S. Customs Service, now U.S. Customs and Border Protection. So we're making money out here, and if you want us here at all, then you have to pay to play.
Well, this current administration, however, does not agree with the current IRS situation that they were under as far as their political platform.
And I
being
wish
targeted.
I wish I shared your optimism that the current administration would be on our side here. I'm skeptical. Like I said, I'm willing to help with raising this issue further out and further up.
You don't know unless you ask.
Correct.
And you don't know unless
But
you're
we
driving
have.
your own train.
But we have asked, and as big an issue as this is for us, in the grand scheme of the federal government, this is change lost in the couch cushion. And in terms of what our elected representatives, and I'm managing not to choke on that word, what our elected representatives want to spend their time doing, I don't think this even cracks their top 15 of priorities. Not while there are book deals to be pursued. So it's like, I do think there's not much new we can say about this. We're being held over a barrel, and it sucks, pardon my French. I kind of feel like at this point, we just have to decide, are we biting the bullet or not?
Yeah, and just to color that a little bit, there are other airports in Montana, I won't say who, that are in the same situation and are choosing not to pursue it. So, I said, hey, look, maybe together we could be in a better spot, but they're not gonna pursue it. And I think they're doing that calculation a little different than we are. To them, they're bigger than us, and so maybe it's not much money, but it is something affecting a lot of folks, and when you look at the landscape, no one's making a dent in it yet.
Well, I think we've discussed this enough. If someone in the Commissioner Gibbs or Whiting has another viewpoint you would like to bring?
No, it's not right, but I don't think we have any other options at this point in time. And I think we just need to pursue some sort of meeting, if Terry can set that up.
And
Speak with the representatives. I don't think we have any choice but to.
More than happy to assist or use supporting books in that fact. I mean, okay.
As much as this pains me to say, I move that we accept being extorted and pay the ransom.
I second the motion to grant the director authorization to enter into the agreement as attached, paying Custom and Border Protection's $75,600 equipment and service cost per month. And may God have mercy on all our souls.
Ditto. Any further discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay.
Aye.
Nay. So the motion passes. Let us unpause item 2. The standard audit contract with Rudd and Company, PLLC.
So again, this is a multi-year contract. We neglected to sign a multi-year contract on the initial proposal, instead of deciding to do a one-year contract and kind of see where we were afterwards. That has proven to be a better situation. The rates going forward a little better than they would have been under the initial proposal. So you can see here in 2A, the proposal for multi-year contracts ranges between 61.9 and 66.1 to complete that audit over the next 3 years. And we would, obviously, if we don't have to do it this way, we could go year by year, but this is their proposal if we want to do a multi-year. In the past, we've tried to keep our auditor at least 4 or 5 years. I believe the current policies of the board are to try and keep the auditor for at least 5 years on the per contract, and we did after that. So this would give us 4 years of contract. If we did this, obviously 1 year in already, this would give us 3 more years. We'd still have 1 more year before we RFP again under our normal cycle. So if the board wants, we can pursue this year by year, or we can sign a 3-year run.
I just have a clarifying question. So you keep saying this is 3 more years, but we're ending year 1, right? So it's actually only 2 more years after.
Well,
It's
the audit,
included this year.
but the audit work hasn't started
Yeah,
yet.
the audit work doesn't
The
start
audit
yet.
work will start next month, shortly after.
Oh, I see, got it, covering, sorry.
And this does, just so you guys know, our last contract, they charge us for what they use for mileage and stay and everything when they do come. So it could be even lower. It's just, that's what they're estimating travel and everything to be in it. So last year, what we signed for versus what we paid was less because of the travel and stuff. So it could be a little bit lower, but it's just what they're estimating.
Sure.
Okay. Any discussion? I would entertain a motion.
I think that,
To authorize the director to sign the 3-year contract for audit services for fiscal year 2025, 2026, and 2027 as presented.
Excellent.
second.
And we have a second. Any additional discussion? All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? The motion passes. Thank you, Aileen, for providing this. All right, so, as we are, that's the end of the official board meeting. Are there any additional comments from the public? Oh, excellent.
Go ahead, Chad.
Mine's long. Mine's long, you go.
It's like you're making me stand up again.
So, I would like to just express my appreciation to the board and to the airport management for moving forward with this extortion. I'm optimistic we'll get someplace. I offer my support, Terry, to your endeavors there, because I feel the same way. But in Great Falls, the two FBOs, I've talked to the management of the other FBO, Great Falls Jet Center, and we're working diligently to make the airport authority whole on this, so that it's not a red blip on this that has nothing to show for it. But I want to stay optimistic that this port of entry has value to this airport. It is unique. The Customs and Border Protection people, if you believe what they say, we have the most clearings of any airport between Minneapolis and Seattle. Okay, more than Fargo, which is a major location to come into the country at. So I think this is something that we have, it's valuable. I believe Billings gave up there some years ago. Yes?
Oh, that one. I can't remember what billing status is. I know Bozeman is paid.
But I know that, I thought Billings gave theirs up and they wanted to come back in and re-establish theirs, and it turned out to meet the specifications for Customs and Border Protection. It was a $10 million bill to the Billings Airport, which they couldn't swing that. So I believe which has value. I appreciate your support on that, and we're gonna make the budget for the airport authority whole. Okay.
Get your pitchforks ready. Okay. So, yeah, the government thing, that's gonna be fun. But mine, with the Minneapolis route and things like that, so the discussion is still ongoing. It's not gone forever. It's a long process, and moving the needle on the largest airline in the world, it's hard. So I'm the driver.
Excuse
so,
me.
Yeah.
The public needs to state their name.
Oh, Chad, I'm with
Thank you.
downstairs. Yeah, thanks, Sean.
But I just want the record to reflect, Chad.
Yeah, so I'm the biggest cheerleader for the route right now. So I don't have Facebook, so I don't see what people are saying, but I know what they're saying at the ticket counter. And it's not good. It's not a good look. At the same time, decisions were made based on some fears and some ongoing uncertainty in the markets. Here we're a very stable market, even though we might have 70, 76 seat jets every day. Our load factors are steady, so it's not like we're gonna pull anything else. But Minneapolis is our only connection east, and that's something I wanna keep. I use it 1 to 2 times a month. I'm actually using it Friday to go to Europe. So it's a big connection for us, and the whole catchment area, you know, I pull from anywhere from Lewistown, Medicine Hat, Calgary, all the way over by Kalispell. I even pull from Helena. The actual Helena airport director flew out 2 days ago. So on that flight. So I do catch a lot, and I get everybody's frustrations. I get it. I actually wrote a letter myself to the vice presidents of the company. It made it all the way up to Ed Bastian's desk. So to try to salvage it, and it wasn't a loss. It's not a complete loss of a route, but we're just working through some different options. And at the moment, SkyWest is the largest regional carrier actually in the world by standards of flights, and they're spread thin. So we're also looking at some alternate options for bringing our other subsidiary carrier Endeavor and between SkyWest, and so it's a whole, the route planning system is a complex web. It's a mess. So we're trying our best. It's not only a hit for us locally here, but it's also a hit for the airport as well. That's a big revenue driver. One less jet bridge is less money. So it's something that I'm working on. I work on it every week. I have meetings every single week about it to try to figure out how we can bring it back. So the summer loads are gonna be amazing. It's gonna be the airport's busiest summer on record, and it will be. And right now, I mean, my flights currently, I thought our loads were gonna drop over Memorial Day, but they really didn't. So, we're gonna be, this summer, you're gonna probably see a good 80 to 90% consistent load for the next 3 months. It's gonna be our highest revenue, with our lowest amount of staff that I've had in a long time, so, but yeah, it's gonna be John's busiest summer. If United could stay on time, that would be awesome, then it would take some load off of us, but, yeah, we're just working through it, so, just know that there's eyes in the sky. So this little nugget here, everybody knows where we are. I'm the biggest proponent of keeping it, so I'm the one that's gonna be doing most of the legwork, so. If anybody has any comments, like if the public gets a hold of you or whatnot, it's best to steer them in the direction of delta.com to put in a comment. Facebook is one way, but those comments get shot. I actually see those comments, and also our corporate communications team sees all those comments, and then that gets escalated up the chain to the different department heads. So it's a giant system, but those comments do come in and they are looked at every single day. So just food for thought. So
Appreciate your efforts on that front.
yeah.
Is there any way to get east on Delta? I mean, it's, the only way is Delta to Salt Lake to Atlanta?
Yes, so our eastward bound connections out of Salt Lake we bolstered. The only problem is when we're looking at all of our route planning, I don't have LaGuardia out of Salt Lake. I don't have LaGuardia. I don't have Hartford. It's gonna be tough. So all roads sadly are gonna lead to Atlanta. Either Atlanta, Detroit, Minneapolis. It's gonna lead that way.
Do you know how many markets they added on the Salt Lake eastbound though? Because that was one of the things route planning did mention is they've built a bunch of new connections from Salt Lake to the east. But they didn't really say what all those connections are.
It's mostly, it's added, Charlotte, Memphis, Nashville, Atlanta, Orlando, Palm Beach, Tampa. Oh man, Kennedy's got 4 a day, Boston's got 5 a day, Detroit's got 5 a day. So it just kind of depends, and the time of year as well. And the other thing to note is, like he showed the graph up there, if you look at Great Falls' traffic over the, take a year in a whack, versus a Bozeman, Kalispell, Missoula, Billings, we stay, on par all year. We're the most stable market in the state. Kalispell and Missoula, they see these big waves just because of the tourism and the upgauged flights in the summertime. So that's a huge selling factor that I'm trying to use to, get it back as soon as I can. Just because that's stable. Our rates stay pretty stagnant, kind of fluctuates depending on the year, but we'll do fare sales and that sorts of things just to kind of bolster that business. But in our flight times, that's the other thing too. I make all this flight schedule out of here, so all those published times, that's all me. So I set all of those times. Networking is very transparent, so our flight times will pretty much stay the same on the Salt Lake side. Fluctuate 5 or 10 minutes on either side, but it's not going to be too much of a difference. So, yeah, eastbound travel is going to be. I don't like going through Atlanta, but it's going to be the route, the crazy snaking route to get to wherever we need to go. So it's going to be interesting.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other public comments? Commissioner Swafford?
Sounds good, sir.
Commissioner Thompson? Motion goes. Commissioner Whiting?
I do want to thank Dwight and Chad for being here. It really does help us have a bigger picture so we're not making decisions in a bubble. I appreciate that. I also appreciate our staff. I know you guys have been fielding a lot of the calls about the Minneapolis, and I'm just wondering, potentially, if we could maybe bolster our social media, like have complaints, Chad dot, no, just kidding, you know, Delta.com, so that maybe our public knows, like, if you do file a complaint, or, you know, lodge send an email, that actually it does go somewhere and we have the potential to make a difference. I also wonder about a news story about Customs and Border Patrol, what that looks like, what that means, because there's nothing like a little public involvement for somebody to pick that up. And I also know Randy, I was just with him this morning, I think we could have a little chit chat with him and bring it to the senator's attention. Tim Sheehy's a pilot, he lands here quite frequently. I think it'd be easy to grab somebody like him and have the conversation, just say, hey, just so you know, here's a thing, or when he lands out at a friend's house, I just think we need to, I think we did the right thing, because we have to stay an international airport, but I do think we have to fight it. And I think there are enough people in this room with enough good connections that we can get it to somebody's attention, even if it's through media.
All right. Thank you. And with that, I will adjourn the, so let's take a 10-minute break and be back in 15.
10-minute break.
Well, are you doing it around?
It is 2:30, and we're gonna start at 2:45. For the work session.
What am I missing?